guys, welcome back to Southern Latitudes. I'm Robin, and this is part 4 of a series that we are having on when to put your seeds in the ground and transplant and when you should be able to harvest in Florida. Now, it's going to be a little bit fluid depending on where you are. Florida kind of spans 3 different zones, really. I think it's like 8B, 9A, 9B. I'm in 9B. Then there's 10A, and maybe the Keys are even 10B. So all that's kind of relative. These dates will be fluid according to where you live. If you're north of me, you'll want to plant before these dates that I'm giving you. If you're south of me, you might be able to hold off a little bit. In fact, you may be able to do things completely different if you're in like super South Florida. I can tell you what you can recommend no matter where you are in the country, and that is a Clyde's Garden Planner. And Clyde has made these great planners. This side is for spring, this side is for fall. It's very handy. Now I'm going to show you and explain to you in some of these miscellaneous crops. We've already done peppers, onions, and tomatoes. Now this is going to be the everything else in between. And while this is a good guide, I also want to add a little bit of my 2 cents because I live in a very hurricane-friendly zone. That's probably not the right wording, but anyhow, things will change. I will even change my own plan based on what's going on in the Atlantic Ocean, or coming, maybe a hurricane through the Gulf of Mexico coming across the state. So all things are subject to change according to what weather goes on. But we've been pretty fortunate the last 2 years to not have any super direct hits to my area. The 2 years before that, or 3 years before that, we had some awful Cat 4s. Just know that going into your fall planting season, no matter what crop that you decide to plant, that it can always be ruined by a hurricane, winds, rain, flood, stuff like that. I do plant in the ground. I don't have raised beds, and that's a risk I'm willing to take. So there's advantages and disadvantages. Let's start with soil. First of all, what I do is either I give a slight cultivating, tilling of the first inch or 2 just to wipe out the weeds, or a hand pull, or if I have to, I'll just tarp. Some of these places, some of these beds I've already tarped for summer because I know that the St. Augustine and the crabgrass, all that's going to get out of control with the pretty much daily rains. Then everything is has a layer of mushroom compost on top of it. You can do whatever you want, blood meal, bone meal, if you want to put on a 666, 10, 10, 10, whatever you can find, with the things that are going on these days. Nothing's a guarantee. If you have a question, ask me in the comments below. But what I try to do is mushroom compost, if available. When COVID hit and everything shut down, I wasn't able to get mushroom compost for about 1.5 years. And last summer was my first season going into fall, so almost 1 year ago was the first time I was able to get mushroom compost again. And of course, everything's growing nicely again. Clyde's Garden Planner, you can find it through a lot of your big YouTubers, or the Homesteading of America website, or just on Amazon. There's 2 other big things I would like to tell you before we get into individual crops. If you're looking to plant a squash or a pumpkin, and perhaps melons fall in this category too, the mochata, or moscata, however you say it, and the mixta, they do very well in Florida. We seem to have no problem with them. For anything with a Pepo or Maxima in the genus species name, those struggle a little bit. Maybe if you're in the Panhandle, it's not quite as bad, but definitely down here, I'm subtropical, and those really struggle for me. It's not impossible, it's just much harder. Are you ready to go for your winter crops? Okay, we're going to talk about, I'll put them up here, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels, kale, bok choy. I think that's most of them, okay? I went ahead and I seeded them August 18th. And you're like, wow, that was crazy early. Yeah, it was crazy early. And there's a trick to that, okay? If you're not going to do my trick, I recommend you waiting until about October 1st to do that. That's probably more what's along the line with the recommendations here. Here's my little trick for my winter crops. What I go ahead and do is I seed them in my trays, and then I stick them in the refrigerator. I have a garage refrigerator that's, you can get a little bit dirtier than your house fridge, and it has plenty of space in it. A lot of times it goes unused, and I stick that in the refrigerator for 3 days. If you don't have that, another great option is if you're already running your air conditioning, especially around the 73-degree mark. Probably if you're over 75 it won't work, but stick your tray under the AC vent. That worked very well. I did that last year for 3 days, and that allows your seeds to germinate. Some of these cold weather crops will not germinate in August and September like I'm recommending, because they need cool temps, and we're still like 78, 76 degree nights. That's my little trick for that. We're also going to use that trick for something else a little bit later. So what I did was I seeded August 18th. I had put them in the ground by September 15th, and that seemed to work pretty well. And I got some food, depending on what it is, because like bok choy is really fast, and then broccoli is in the middle, and cauliflower, and then you have cabbage, takes forever, but you'll usually get a lot of food by December. For another set of cold crops, for example, say your lettuces, your radishes, your kale, kohlrabi, spinach, turnips, if you like those too. I did a direct seed into my soft garden, and I waited. I didn't stick those in the fridge. You can still do those in the tray too, but I waited, since it takes times for me to get compost out on all the gardens. I don't always have the ability to do them all in one date or 1 week. So I waited, and I sowed that on October 7th. Direct seed right into the ground. I did my bouquet dill, sweet basil, did a few other herbs out there. So, and a couple flowers. I did cosmos out there as well. If you don't direct sow, you should definitely have them in the ground by October 21st for a transplant. I have done that as well. Just last year I did all the direct sowing. Okay, let's talk about Swiss chard, squash, summer squash, pumpkins, and melons. And I think beans fall in this category, like bush beans, green beans. So I actually did all that on September 20th. But according to Clyde's Garden Planner, you can start that anytime the first or second week, from September 1st all the way to the 13th. And, you can direct sow that into the ground. Now, again, this is highly variable according to your weather, hurricanes, north, south, of course. But I found it was okay for me. I started September 20th, and it took a good month or so before they got big enough to start flowering and fruiting. And I was definitely pulling squash off by November 12th. So we had time for them to grow. The light is decreasing, don't forget. There's less photosynthesis going on. And so what was a month in the spring, maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks in the fall. But I know I have proof. I was picking summer squash November 11th with that date. For peas, now here's the little trick with peas. They love being direct sown. I have transplanted, it's okay. But I think they just really love something about direct sow and putting a deep taproot down in the ground. They also like to be in very tight with each other. That's a little trick for you guys. Don't worry about, like 1 foot spacing, 6-inch spacing, 3-inch spacing. Just go ahead and put a whole bunch of peas down in your ground. Next up is cucumbers. Now, cucumbers is tricky because the garden planner does actually say you can start in mid-September in ground. You can start it in a tray. Usually they pop up within 3 days, and then you can within a week have them in the ground, and they take off rather fast. I have found if you start in September, especially where I am, and it's still subtropical, and you're still going to get heavy rains, we're still in our rainy season until about that third week of October, that rain will sometimes get all of your cucurbits, which are the cucumbers, the squash, the pumpkins. My cucumbers here in my yard did not like it. I got powdery mildew very quickly, and I got almost nothing. I tend to do most of my cucumbers in the spring, and that's great. And so when I do them in spring, I tend to use March 1st as my guideline, because I know I'm far past the last frost date. But this year I was just going to be lazy and buy cucumbers in a case, and thought I would get away with making pickles that way. And the price had shot up exponentially compared to years past. And so I went ahead and sowed late. I put in the ground, the trays March 24th, and I don't think they were in the ground till, I think that was somewhere around the 7th of April. And then we caught COVID. But then by the time I came out of COVID, I had cucumbers ready for harvest. Okay, potatoes. So sweet potatoes are going, hopefully, for you and for me right now in the summer. I do have a couple of rows, probably a dozen or so sweet potato vines going over here. More or less just for a cover crop than actual huge storage production. In years past, I used to have sweet potatoes over in the house garden, and I just kind of let it get out of hurricane season, which ends, I think, October 1st, if I remember right. Might be the 31st, but October 1st is kind of like a nice date in my mind to remember as we start cooling down dramatically through that month. It's a good time to, if you want, get your seed potatoes, have those ready to go. So, okay, let's talk celery, because that's a big one. I didn't know for years that we could grow celery in Florida. And you actually really can. It grows very well in Florida. It doesn't grow when the rest of the country grows it. So here's my other tip and trick for another cold weather crop. You do cilantro and celery the same way. So usually I just get like a big cup, any kind of, growing cup like this, and I will just sprinkle the seed. A lot of them don't require to be buried, or they're just like 1/8 of an inch buried. And I put them in here, and I go tuck them in the fridge for 3, 4, 5 days at the most. And then I bring them out, and then I will let them, like maybe put them in a room where they can get sunlight and then start to germinate. As soon as I start seeing germination, I'll bring it out here, because then I know my trick has worked. They are a cold weather crop. They love cold nights. And so you have to do that little trick, because it takes celery forever to get this big. I'm talking about a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It takes, I started first, second week of August, and then I didn't even transplant them in the ground until November 19th last year. Now, here's the good side. Once they're in the ground and they're happy and they're over the shock and they're in good soil, they grow like crazy, and you will be harvesting and eating it all winter. It can snow on them. Don't worry about covering them. And you can totally, I still got celery out there right now. I have a variety I don't like out there, but then I have the tango that's going very well. And you don't want to, if you're having a drought, you probably don't want to eat it unless you soak it in a glass of water overnight and kind of rehydrate your celery, if you will. There you go. There's another trick. Cilantro too, if you don't want to put it in a fridge, definitely wait to early October, mid-October. Anytime after that, you can do it monthly if you want. I do a lot of succession sowing of cilantro all winter long. So I will put it in one garden 1 month, and then this garden the next month. And I might have some self-seeding up there in the front this year, because I had a big bouquet of cilantro up there. And then you always have that fresh, nice size before it bolts and goes up. We can actually be rather warm here in Central Florida all the way up to Christmas. And then next thing you know, you're in like serious cold weather. It just depends on where you are. There's pockets of warmth, pockets of cold. Know your ground. Okay, one cabbage we did not really talk about specifically was Chinese cabbage. It's a lovely vegetable, don't get me wrong, but for growing it, it's very difficult here in Florida. Even in the winter where we have very little bug pressure, it just seems to be a bug attractant type of crop. And in gardener terms, they call that a trap crop. And a lot of gardeners will plant it next to something that is a good, valuable crop, or a cash crop if they're selling, if they're commercial. I tend to not put in Chinese cabbage unless I want to distract bugs from something else. I have put it in between broccoli and cabbages a couple years ago, and then I didn't have it last year when I was over here, but I still had no bug problems over this way in the house garden. Okay, so what can you do if you really, really want to plant something now, but you don't want to resow in the fall, and you still want something to take you through to Christmas or frost? Amaranth is a really great thing. You can plant it every month through the summer in Florida. Loofah. It's never too late for loofah unless you're in a freeze. I had that sucker going I had like 4 plants in March, and it didn't die until like the middle of December of that same year. And I had so much loofah. I still have loofah. I have loofah from the front too as well, because I was a dummy and I put it in a couple places. But the great thing about loofah is, okay, suppose you're in a crisis situation, okay? Just imagine that. Loofah works really well for my pots. It works good for my cast iron. It works good for my Teflon. It works good on my stainless. It works good in the bath. It's a great exfoliator. There's a lot of uses for loofah, so it may be something that you're interested in planting. Let's talk about the last couple of herbs and stuff. We talked about cilantro, but we didn't talk about thyme, parsley, and sage, and that's really pretty much the only ones, and basil. Okay, we did talk about basil, but I pretty much just go out and I buy a cup of sage, because it's easier for me to spend $3, $5, however cheap you can find it, and just pop it in the ground. I believe I popped my sage in the spring of 2021, and it went all the way to July, and I harvested so much of it, dehydrated it, put it in jars, gave it a healthy trim back on everywhere else, and then it was popped right back up in August and September. Sage did really well. Now thyme, I usually keep in a container. I have started from seed. I started from seed this year, and I started last year from seed. It's just really slow going. So you essentially, started it March 1st, for example, and, make sure it stays watered, and then just kind of forget about it. I have mine under irrigation, under a sprinkler. Is that the word? And, I just forgot about it. And next thing I know, I had some nice thyme. Now, and I also bought thyme last year too, that I put into the green stock. All of it is in the shade. My expectations for it to make it past August are about 25%. I have done it, but it's not very easy, and I'm not very successful at it, just owning it. It's just a hard crop. But since some of them are in containers, hopefully you'll take that advice. Then you just pop it in your kitchen and put it in a windowsill or living room, wherever you want, bedroom, and just get through the hottest of that month, and then bring it back out for late September. It's pretty easy. For parsley, what I did is I just sowed it in about October time, and I let it grow out there in the house garden. And then and you don't have to worry about frost and freezes as long as they're not super cold. But you know, if you're right around 30 degrees and above, you're probably going to be just fine with most your herbs. And I harvested it and dehydrated it and jarred it. And then next thing I know, if it wanted to die, it was fine. I have enough already in my house, and then we'll just restart again in the fall or in the spring, or I'll just buy a pot if I forget. Last but not least, I'm still kind of new to safflower, and I tried it twice up front. For sure it likes sun. It didn't like that. It liked it once it got a little warmer, so I learned my lesson the hard way twice, but I did get one plant up. I have safflower going again. It just germinated in this heat, so it's definitely a heat germinating plant. Okay, you guys, so we're pretty much done here. I just really want you to take away a couple things. Decreasing sunlight, the humidity is just going to be like nothing the rest of the country sees. So that's going to play a huge role in funguses and in disease, and perhaps also pest pressure. Again, that's why I don't do the cucumbers. And I had a hard time with squash last year. I got a couple fruit, and then my plants died on me. This year, my game plan is actually to start my patty pan squash and my summer squash later in October, because I do feel that we had at least 2 good months of warm enough heat, but lacking the rainy season and the humidity to get that squash grown, fruited out, and in the house and eaten. So that's just something I'm still learning on as far as a fall crop. In the spring we have no problem because we're much drier until the 3rd week of May. So you guys, I thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope this is information that you find valuable. If there's something I forgot or confused you on or misspoke, please put it in the comments below, and I'm happy to address it. I can't believe it's right around the corner. We're going to be starting all this planting, but for now, I guess we just have to buy our seeds, think about how much fertilizer or how much whatever we need. Remember, if you're coastal, that you cannot fertilize till October 1st, so don't put that into your ground yet. But if you buy mushroom compost, or if you do home composting and stuff like that, that's perfectly fine to amend your soil with that. Well, you guys, that's it. That's all I can think of for right now. I think I've talked your ears off. Well, take care. God bless. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.